Wide shot of Australian Parliament House under cloudy skies. Slow zoom with background music. Intense, new-style strings. Cut to clips of past debates, Abbott speaking, media flashes, commentators talking. In politics, there are moments that rewrite history. Moments so powerful that they echo through the halls of Parliament long after the microphones fall silent. In 2025, such a moment arrived. Unexpected, unplanned, and unforgettable. A moment when former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, a man who once led the country with both controversy and conviction, stood again in the national spotlight, and delivered a statement that would shake the Australian Parliament to its core. Cameras rolled. Reporters froze. Every headline in the country shifted in that instant. What began as an ordinary parliamentary session turned into one of the most talked about political moments of the decade. Some called it a comeback. Others, a challenge. Many said it was a warning. But one thing was certain: Australia was watching. In this episode, we dive deep into the bold statement that reignited Tony Abbott's political relevance, exploring how one man, years after leaving office, managed to shake the system once more. Montage of Parliament session cameras. Breaking news graphics with headline: Abbott's shocking statement stuns Canberra. Fade into next section with dramatic transition sound. The political context before the statement Parliament scenes from recent months. Shots of opposition benches, protesters outside Parliament, newspapers on screen. Clips showing rural areas and talk shows discussing leadership issues. To understand the weight of Tony Abbott's words, we must first understand the political storm brewing before he spoke. Australia in 2025 was politically divided. The Liberal Party and National Party, long-time allies under the coalition, had fractured under internal disputes. Ideological differences had deepened on climate policy, rural representation, and immigration reform. While the Labor government maintained a steady majority, the opposition was in turmoil. Conservative voters were disillusioned, and moderates were uncertain about the future direction of their party. Amidst all this, Tony Abbott, once seen as the face of conservative politics, had been relatively quiet. Out of office, but not out of influence, Abbott continued to speak occasionally at think tanks, write columns, and attend party conferences. His ideas, though polarizing, still resonated with a significant segment of Australians who longed for what they called the old stability. In early 2025, rumours began to swirl. Was Abbott planning something? A new movement? A speech? A symbolic return? Then came a clue: an official invitation to address Parliament during a special session on national unity and coalition cooperation. It was supposed to be routine, but insiders knew Abbott rarely spoke without purpose. Journalists, sensing tension, filled the press gallery. Political analysts waited for sound bites. The air in the chamber was heavy with speculation. And when Abbott finally stood, every camera in the room turned toward him. Abbott standing in Parliament. Close-up of his notes. Opposition members watching closely. News ticker animation. Tony Abbott addresses Parliament after long silence. The bold statement. What he actually said spotlight on Abbott at the lectern. Parliament interior with attentive silence. Split screen with media channels broadcasting the speech live. It began quietly. Abbott started by acknowledging Australia's long democratic tradition, thanking both sides of the chamber for their service. It seemed polite, even ordinary. But within minutes, the tone shifted. His voice grew firmer, his message sharper. Then came the words that no one expected. I deeply regret the coalition split, and I believe the only way forward, the only way to truly serve this nation, is to reunite, recommit, and rebuild under shared conservative principles. The chamber froze. Members of Parliament glanced at one another in disbelief. Some clapped. Others frowned. Reporters' fingers raced across keyboards. In just one sentence, Abbott had done something extraordinary. He had publicly challenged the party leadership, questioned the current strategy, and reignited a debate about the future of the Australian right. He didn't stop there. Abbott continued, saying, "We cannot serve the Australian people by fighting among ourselves. If we lose our unity, we lose our purpose. And if we lose our purpose, we lose Australia's trust. The phrase struck deep. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was a call to arms. A challenge to both sides of the fractured coalition to return to what Abbott described as authentic conservative values. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of the statement went viral on X, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Political panels debated whether Abbott was signaling a return to frontline politics, or simply reminding everyone that he still had the power to influence the national conversation. Regardless of intention, one fact was clear. Tony Abbott's bold statement had shaken Australian Parliament. The man once written off as history had, once again, made history. Overlay of newspaper headlines, Abbott's speech sparks division. Reaction clips from MPs. Social media screenshots trending hashtag Abbott speech 2025. Fade to black as suspenseful music builds. Immediate reaction. Shock, cheers and backlash fade in from the silence after Abbott's speech. Close-up shots of Parliament members' faces. Confusion, shock, applause. Background audio. Light murmuring, gavel striking, reporters rushing out. B-roll of journalists outside Parliament House speaking to cameras. The chamber erupted, not in chaos, but in a stunned, confused wave of emotion. Some clapped. Others stayed motionless. A few leaned across the benches, whispering urgently. It was one of those rare moments in politics where every second felt heavier than the last. As Abbott sat down, the speaker called for order, but the room had already lost it. Journalists in the gallery were on their phones, sending the first push notifications. Breaking. Tony Abbott calls for Conservative reunification in emotional address. Within minutes, the news hit the airwaves. The evening bulletins cut live to Parliament replay footage. Commentators tried to keep up, parsing every word, every facial expression. Outside the chamber, reactions came in like shockwaves. Senior members of the Liberal Party were divided. Some praised Abbott's courage, saying it was the wake-up call the coalition needed. Others condemned it as a reckless intervention that risked further division. The Prime Minister's office released a short, carefully worded statement. We respect Mr. Abbott's views, though we believe the government's current direction reflects Australia's modern needs. Translation. They were caught off guard. Completely. Opposition figures called Abbott's remarks nostalgic and out of step with the country's future. Yet even critics admitted, the speech had struck a chord with a large segment of voters who felt ignored. Across talk shows and social media, the public split into camps overnight. On one side, the loyalists, long-time conservatives who saw Abbott's message as a call to reclaim integrity and unity. On the other, the progressives, those who viewed the speech as an outdated echo of a political era best left behind. The hashtags began trending immediately. Hashtag Abbott returns, hashtag Tony shock speech, hashtag reunite the right, hashtag Australia divided. TikTok was flooded with clips of Abbott's speech over dramatic music. On X, Twitter, pundits debated what his words really meant. By midnight, nearly every major newspaper had pushed a front-page alert. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Abbott's return? The statement that stunned Parliament shockwaves in Canberra. Abbott challenges party line old guard or visionary. The debate over Abbott's words, but while the media went into overdrive, one question began to dominate the national conversation. What did Tony Abbott really want? Was this the beginning of a new political chapter, or the last spark of an old flame? Cut to newsroom graphics, TV panels, split-screen debates. Interviews of political analysts. Show social media comments, both supportive and critical. End the section with a slow zoom out of Parliament House at night as headlines flash across the screen. Calm background music, investigative tone. Clips of Tony Abbott from past speeches and interviews. Archival footage of his years as Prime Minister. Campaign rallies, debates, policy meetings. Overlay of the Australian flag waving in slow motion. To understand the deeper meaning of Abbott's words, we have to step back and look at the man himself, and the moment in which he chose to speak. Tony Abbott has always been a political figure defined by conviction. Whether people agreed or not, few doubted his willingness to say what others wouldn't. When he rose to power in 2013, Abbott embodied a brand of leadership that prized discipline, traditional values, and clear-cut governance. His critics called him divisive. His supporters called him decisive. But after leaving office, Abbott faced years of being dismissed as a relic of the past. The world had moved toward progressive politics, renewable energy, and global cooperation, issues Abbott had often approached with skepticism. By 2025, however, the tide had subtly shifted again. Many Australians were feeling economic pressure, cultural fatigue, and political disillusionment. A growing number of voters believed the government was out of touch, too soft on accountability, too distant from the working class. Abbott saw an opportunity. His statement in Parliament was more than nostalgia. It was strategic timing. He knew the coalition was divided. He knew Conservative voters felt leaderless. And he knew that one powerful, well-timed message could reposition him not just as a historical figure, but as a moral compass. Behind the bold statement lay a multi-layered goal. 1. To reclaim relevance. After years in the background, Abbott reminded the nation he was still a political force. 2. To pressure the party. His words were aimed directly at the Liberal leadership, urging them to stop chasing centrist approval and refocus on their ideological base. 3. To test public reaction. By gauging the country's response, Abbott could measure whether a more traditional Conservative message still resonated. And the results were mixed, but powerful. Within days, polls showed a spike in online searches for Abbott's past policies. Conservative podcasts began revisiting his leadership years. Donations to right-wing advocacy groups quietly increased. Abbott hadn't announced a return. He didn't need to. The act of speaking, and speaking boldly, was enough to reinsert his name into Australia's political bloodstream. Yet, beneath the strategy, there was something deeper, almost personal. Those close to Abbott said he had grown frustrated watching what he saw as a loss of purpose in modern Australian politics. His statement wasn't just about power. It was about identity. About reminding the nation, and his party, of what he believed Australia once stood for: hard work, clear values, and unity under conviction. Whether one admired him or opposed him, Abbott's intent was unmistakable. He wanted to spark a debate, and he succeeded. Because in a world where politicians often speak carefully and avoid controversy, Tony Abbott had done something rare. He had spoken from conviction, without calculation. And that, in today's politics, was revolutionary in itself. Footage of Abbott walking out of Parliament, surrounded by reporters. Close-up of headlines showing rising online attention. Crossfade into graphs showing polls, media coverage, and social discussion volume. Slow fade out with the narrator's voice lowering to a reflective tone. Long-term effects and legacy begin with a calm instrumental sound. Slow piano mixed with faint newsroom chatter. Fade through newspaper clippings, social media posts, and public polls. Show montage of Australian cities: Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, people reading, debating, and reacting. Weeks passed since the moment Tony Abbott's words echoed through Parliament, but the aftershocks did not fade. In politics, time often erases controversy. But Abbott's statement seemed to do the opposite. It lingered, expanded, and began shaping conversations far beyond the walls of Parliament. The immediate noise died down, but something deeper had begun to shift. Inside the Liberal Party, Abbott's bold address reignited an internal identity crisis. Senior figures began asking questions privately they hadn't dared voice for years. Had the party drifted too far from its Conservative roots? Were voters still connected to the new direction? And had Australia lost something essential in its effort to modernise politics? A quiet ideological struggle started to form, not of personalities, but of principles. Some saw Abbott's speech as a reminder of moral clarity. Others saw it as a warning of regression. But whichever side they stood on, the truth was undeniable. Tony Abbott had reopened a door that many believed was permanently shut. Small blue diamond within the coalition, younger MPs who had never served under Abbott began revisiting his policies, examining how his leadership balanced fiscal control, defence strength, and social unity. Small blue diamond in media circles, analysts debated whether Abbott's statement marked the beginning of a wider Conservative revival across the Western world, part of a broader trend challenging globalization, identity politics, and economic dependency. Small blue diamond among the public, polls showed something even more interesting. A growing number of middle-aged voters, those who had lived through Abbott's tenure, began describing his era as simpler, clearer, and more focused. They weren't necessarily asking for his return, but they were longing for a time when politics felt grounded, not tangled in spin. Abbott's speech also had ripple effects internationally. Political commentators in the UK, Canada, and the US cited it in discussions about how Western democracies were wrestling with populism, identity, and the meaning of leadership. One British columnist wrote, "Abbott may no longer hold office, but his message resonates across every parliament where conviction is being replaced by calculation." It wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about the idea of leadership in an age where leaders feared controversy more than failure. Inside universities and think tanks, his statement became a case study, the Abbott moment, exploring how one speech could reframe the political mood of a nation. As months turned to years, historians began to place Abbott in a different light. He was no longer just the former prime minister who had faced internal rebellion. He became the voice of a philosophy that refused to vanish. Even critics who disagreed with him found themselves acknowledging one thing: he had dared to speak when others chose silence. And in politics, that alone can define a legacy. Abbott's 2025 statement, short, sharp, and seemingly spontaneous, might one day be remembered as the moment when Australian politics rediscovered its appetite for honesty. Whether people admired him or not, Abbott forced Australia to confront its political conscience. He held up a mirror, not to the government, but to the people. And what they saw reflected was both familiar and uncomfortable: the realization that behind every policy debate lies a nation's identity. Show scenes of classrooms, TV debates, podcasts, and political conferences using Abbott speech as reference. Close-ups of books and documentaries quoting his words. A montage of time passing, newspapers aging, parliament sessions changing, cities evolving. Yet Abbott's clip keeps replaying on screens. Legacy, after all, is not built by holding power. It's built by shaping how power is remembered. What it all means: calm orchestral score begins. Slow strings, subtle piano. Shots of the Australian Parliament at dusk, waves crashing on Bondi Beach, people heading home from work. A lone voiceover begins, reflective and emotional. So, what does it all mean? Why did Tony Abbott's words, spoken in a few short minutes, capture the nation's attention once again? Perhaps it's because Australia, like many democracies, finds itself at a crossroads. Between tradition and transformation. Between conviction and compromise. Between the comfort of modernity and the hunger for authenticity. Abbott's speech wasn't perfect, nor was it universally loved. But it was real. And that's something politics often forgets how to be. In a time of scripted answers and consultant-approved phrases, his voice broke through the noise, not because it was flawless, but because it was fearless. For his supporters, it was a reminder that leadership means standing firm even when unpopular. For his critics, it was a lesson in how one person's ideals can still challenge a complacent system. And for Australia as a whole, it was a test to ask itself, who are we becoming as a nation? Are we still a country that values debate, or just one that fears disagreement? The speech may fade from headlines. The debates may quiet. But the questions Abbott raised, about unity, direction, and identity, will echo for years to come. Because sometimes, the most powerful moments in politics are not about laws passed or elections won, but about truth spoken. Tony Abbott's statement will be studied not because of the policy it introduced, but because of the conversation it sparked, a conversation about what leadership means in an age that desperately needs it. As Australia moves forward into an uncertain future, with global shifts, economic challenges, and social divisions, this moment will stand as a reminder: conviction still matters. Courage still matters. And the voice of one person, even one out of power, can still shape the destiny of a nation. So, will Tony Abbott return to politics? Maybe. Maybe not. But perhaps that's not the point anymore. The point is that he reminded Australians, and maybe the world, That leadership isn't about holding office, it's about holding your ground.